And I was nervous because I'm like, once you become public about this, you can't go back to teaching. You can't go back to working with the kids. Are you really ready to let that dream go?
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 180 of the Strokecast, Tawnie the Neuro Mermaid. This episode is brought to you by the fine folks at Modus Nova. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. Tawnie Romero Golick was a special ed teacher and bartender when her brain started bleeding at 28 years old. In this conversation, she shares her lengthy saga of trying to get medical professionals to listen to her, the role of social media in her recovery, and her advocacy for medical marijuana, and, of course, how she discovered the power of being a mermaid and why it is so relevant to her recovery. Tawnie's been an influencer and really a staple of the stroke community for several years now, and I really only wish I had her on the show sooner. But, as they say, the best time to plant a tree if you want shade is 20 years ago. Second best time is today. So let's meet Tawnie the Neuro Mermaid. So Tawnie, thanks so much for joining us on the show this week.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. It's an honor.
This is awesome. We've had one of your other partners in crime on the show a little ways back when we had Maddie on the show back in 97, episode 97, not the year 97. But yeah, like you mentioned, we're all stroke survivors here. So, what was your life like in those sort of weeks leading up to your stroke?
So up until the stroke, I was working as a special education teacher aide. I also bartended. I had just moved back to Ohio like a couple months ago. It's just important because I hadn't been working at the school for that long. And I, normal 28-year-old, no real health problems. I've had migraines since I was 15, but it wasn't like the doctors thought anything was wrong with me. However, my neurosurgeon, because I had moved from California to Ohio, my new neurosurgeon was neurologist, didn't have a neurosurgeon yet. The neurologist said, you've had migraines since you were 15, you've had MRIs, CT scans. I would like to do an MRA. And so he requested that in February. My insurance, denied me. I went to school that day. It was actually Cinco de Mayo. I did have a headache that day, which is not abnormal. I also work around screaming kids. So of course, it got a little bit worse.
Yeah.
And I told my brother, I was like, I'm going to shower and get myself ready. And then I want you to drop me off I actually had a date. I was like, I want you to drop me off there because, I know I'm going to be drinking. And so you'll have to come pick me up later. And I went into the shower and it felt like a baseball bat hit me in the back of the head. Like if I was out, I would have thought someone threw something at me. But since I was in the shower, I just was like, I still to this day don't know why I didn't know immediately, like something popped in your brain. You should have gone right to the ER, but I didn't. I actually luckily caught myself in the shower. I'm tall enough. I'm 5'11". And so I grabbed the shower and then the side. And I just remember thinking, don't hit your head because then you're going to be dead. No one will find you. So I slowly slid down in the shower and I laid there. And now I know I was having mini seizures, but at the time, I don't know why I was like rationalizing. I'm like, you're just in pain and you're wincing, like you're wincing from pain. And I started pounding on the bathtub because, my brother was home and I was pounding on the bathtub. And then I remember being like, the pounding hurt. And I was like, if someone doesn't help you get out of here, like you're not going to make it. And so I started screaming and pounding. And then luckily he must have finally come upstairs and he heard me. And like, I wasn't completely out of it. I made a joke with him. I was like, can you hand me my robe? I don't want to scar you for life, And, I sat up in the shower And then I was like, I need help getting out. Like I felt very unsteady. And so I put my arm around him and he was like, do you want me to carry you? Like, you don't have to walk. And I was like, no, I can walk. I try and tell people it's not black or white. It wasn't like, boom, I went down, I passed out, I couldn't walk. He helped me to the bed. I laid down. I was like, get me my migraine medicine. I, for some reason, just thought, I'm 28 now and I'm old and this is how my migraines are.
Mm.
And so, no, I threw up because I threw up and then I took my migraine medicine. And my mom and my brother throw up from migraines. So I wasn't nervous about that. But now I know, like, I don't throw up from migraines. That's not normal for me.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom came home from work and she was like, let me take you to the ER. And I said, no. I said, no, I don't want to go. It's just a migraine. Let me sleep it off and we'll see how I feel tomorrow. Dumb. If you're listening, please don't do that. And it was Mother's Day weekend. So she left and she called my dad and said, how's Tawnie doing? And he goes, she's just sleeping a lot. And that's what we were nervous about is like, I would be talking and I would like start to fall asleep. And and my neck started becoming really stiff. Like I couldn't touch my chin to my chest. And so we started thinking, what if I have meningitis? So that night we went to the ER. I knew that road and I knew that there was only one lane in each direction. But I told my dad, I'm like, I see the truck in front of us and I see the same truck. Like I'm seeing double. And, oh, that's weird. And so when I went to the ER, I told them, they go, what happened? And I said, worst migraine of my life. Came on suddenly. I threw up. My neck is stiff. My brother had to help me to the bed. I said pretty much everything that's like brain aneurysm, stroke, check her. I told them I had a shooting pain above my eye. And they said, we don't need to scan you. It's just a migraine. But they shot with nerve blockers. And so I still go, they recognized my pain enough to want to numb it. Pain is there for a reason. Pain's there to warn you of things. And like now I'm like, before you inject me with something, you need to scan me. And so they injected me with nerve blockers right above my eye, in the back of my head, and then sent me home. And this was on the weekend. So, I remember just telling myself, and this is why I advocate so hard, that like, yes, doctors are here and they went to school, but they don't know your body. And I felt like something was wrong. And I was like, the doctor didn't even want to scan you. Like, you're being a baby, suck it up. And I called my neurologist, and of course it was the weekend. So I got the whole, like, if it's an emergency, go to the ER. And I'm like, well, I already went to the ER and they didn't do anything. So like, I'll just wait until Monday. So on Monday, I finally got a hold of my neurologist and he heard. I get why he did what he did. I'm not here to doctor bash, but he goes, okay, I'll prescribe you steroids. Let me know if by Friday it doesn't get any better. So I got the steroids and I was like, I mean, I could not sit up. I was just laying there in pain. And I was like, maybe my regular doctor can see me. So I called my normal general doctor. And I went and I saw him, I believe, day. And he saw me and he goes, there's nothing I can really do. If your neurologist said anything, the ER, and I get it again. Two other doctors were like, she's fine. So doctor number 3 was like, you're fine. He actually told me, maybe what if we do your allergy medicine, but as a shot? And despite all the tattoos, I am very nervous of needles. So we actually went to the Walgreens, picked up the medication, and I had him inject me with it because I was like, I can't do it. And my dad was like, I can't do shots. Like, sorry, love you, but no. So I felt a little bit of relief. But again, it was just like that shooting pain above my eye, and like just my neck was incredibly still stiff. And I was just like, okay, this is just what I'm supposed to deal with. Everybody's just, deal with it. And so it turned out that it wasn't until the 12th when I woke up and my eye was crossing in. And that's when I knew something was wrong. Like, I'm like, that's not normal. So I had my dad drive me to, I actually drove to a different hospital because I looked at my insurance and I thought, oh, good, they'll be able to cover everything. So like, again, still being logical, still not, God, my life's on the line. I'm like, let me go to the correct hospital so I can cover everything. And when I went into that hospital, because I was having trouble walking out because I was just like so out of it. So I got wheeled in while my dad went to get parking. And the lady at the front desk, I had my eye closed because it felt better if it was closed. And when I went up to the desk, she was like, why are you here for? And I started saying, worst headache of my life. I felt, like a baseball bat. And I said, in my eye. And then I opened up my eye and she could see it crossed. And she immediately stood up and was like, come with me right now. And so I've never been scanned that quickly. And as soon as she came into the room, which I still kind of find funny, there was no because someone's like, how did they break the news to you? I'm like, they just said, hey, you have a subarachnoid hemorrhage and we don't have a doctor here who can do the angiogram. I mean, I looked at my dad and I remember I kind of laughed and I said, oh, great. So my worst fear is right. My brain is bleeding. And I was like, I don't want to take the ambulance. And I was like, my dad can just drive me. And she looked at me, I don't think you understand what's really happening. And I was like, I don't want to pay the ambulance bill. Like, please just let my dad. And she goes, no. Like, we're monitoring you. You need to. And so I did get life flighted to the Cleveland Clinic. And I just remember them saying, like, make sure you let us know if there's any changes, because they were so worried about the pressure when we were going up. And they were like, people for this are not awake for it. So how's the view? And I'm like, crappy. I can't see out of my one eye. And like, I'm freaking out right now. And they're like, don't freak out. And so when I got to the hospital, there were so many doctors there and it was just crazy. I was there, but like, I wasn't quite understanding everything that was happening. Like, you're going to be having brain surgery. Like, this is serious. And I remembered someone asking my name a lot and me like being like, yeah, what? And then starting to fall asleep. And I was like mad about it. And then like, I remember them like, calm down. Like, don't try to sit up, just lay there. And they were like, we had to go in and you did have brain surgery. And I grabbed my head thinking, I had the craniotomy, but I didn't. They didn't have to perform the craniotomy. I had a coil. So that was like really mind boggling. And I still feel like it blows my mind. I'm like, I had brain surgery through my groin. Like, you didn't even cut my head. Like, that's wild. So they explained to me the reason why I remember talking is I guess when they do the angiogram, they want you like in a twilight. They don't want you completely out. And they said that they kept giving me meds, but I kept responding to them. And I was like, So they actually had to put me completely out. And they were surprised because I had 3 neurosurgeons in there and they said, not like, he didn't say they were making bets, but he goes, we figured, this has been going on a week. There's no way she was bleeding this whole time. It must have shut itself off, But when they went in there, I was still bleeding. So he's like, for the whole, you were bleeding into your brain. And so they were not able, I guess when they do a coil, they usually go in and they put a stent to kind of block everything from wiggling around. But because I had so much blood in my brain, they couldn't put the stent in. So the first 6 months, every single month, I was getting scanned to see if the coils were holding, if they needed to put a stent in, if they needed to put a shunt because of all the built up spinal cord fluid. I'm still walking around with half done brain surgery. But the good thing is my body, he goes, it's amazing. It's a miracle. But the neck of my aneurysm started to close off. So
that's amazing. There's so much stuff in that story. First of all, who's harder to deal with, the special ed kids or the drunks at the bar?
Drunk people at the bar. I've been bit to the point of breaking skin. I've had chairs thrown at me. I would still say maybe it's because they're tiny people and I have more compassion. And when people are just drunk a-holes, I'm like, you didn't have to get that drunk. So
there you go. I was going to say a lot of your story there. It sounds very familiar to the story of Carmen de la Paz. I don't know if you've heard her story, but she lived at massive migraines for 10 years, just always assumed she was dehydrated, so she just kept drinking more water until an aneurysm ruptured in the shower, fireworks, she collapsed on the ground and got immediate treatment because she was, the nature of it, in hers, it was like, last rites in the first ER she went to. And so this happens. The other thing is, you mentioned this feeling dumb for not thinking about what was happening. And, we see people who drive themselves to the hospital now. And I mean, the thing is, this is not an example of being dumb. This is not making a stupid decision. This is the single part of your body that makes decisions about what is the right thing to do, is actively dying, and is not in a position to make any kind of serious decision.
You're absolutely right. And I know people, like even medical students being like having a stroke and saying, like joking, like, oh, I wonder if this is that. No way, I wouldn't be able to talk through it. And that's, I think what I'm hoping with us advocating more is showing that it is not black and white. It's not just like she dropped and everybody knew, I was rationalizing with my family, like, no, I don't need to go. I mean, it took someone else in the stroke community, Joe, to tell me. I just kept saying ruptured brain aneurysm. I had a brain aneurysm. And then he was, you had a hemorrhagic stroke. And I was like, no, I didn't. Nobody ever said that to me. I actually had up my medical documents and I'm like, oh my God, it says it right here. And I find it interesting because even my family, they're like, I don't understand it. Like, you didn't have a stroke. You had a brain aneurysm. I'm like, I did have a stroke. And I think so many people think you can only have a stroke in your heart. And that's so advocated for that. Like, I still sometimes are like, people are like, I'm confused. And I'm like, I know I'm even kind of confused. It's just like a technicality, but I'm like, not all aneurysms are stroke. Like, it's not just a one size fits all. And I just feel like, being a young stroke survivor, there's so many other things that we have to tackle that other people over the age of 40 that don't necessarily have to deal with.
Exactly. And I think that's the other one that a lot of people don't understand what an aneurysm is. They think the aneurysm is the bleed instead of just sort of a weakness or a bubble in the side of the vessel. You can live a perfectly normal, healthy life with multiple aneurysms as long as they don't break.
Exactly. Like because my neurologist said he uses my story every time because he's like, if in February we had that MRA, we would have seen your aneurysm and we could have watched it. We could have maybe clipped it, coiled it, done something before it ruptured. But because they denied me, just because they saw my age, they were like, a 28-year-old does not need an MRA. And I grew up, my mom was like, if I say no, it's no. And if you ask again, then it's no forever. So like I always took, if you say no, that means no. And now I'm learning you have to advocate harder for yourself. Just because they told you no does not mean no. Like, it means maybe you need to find a different doctor. Maybe you need to have, my doctor maybe should have called the insurance. Here or there. I let that go a long time ago. For a while in the beginning, I was very angry about it. I was very how much better, I kept doing that. How much better would I have been if they caught it? Or what if that first ER would have found me and I wasn't bleeding for a whole week? And it took time for me to just be like, it doesn't matter. You just need to focus on the now and how you can make this not happen to somebody else. Right. And the other thing that I think comes into play too is we talk about this in the computer world all the time. GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. And I think we see that in some of the medical system as well. That first ER visit, those doctors, they made a mistake. They wrote it down in your records. The following medical professionals looked at your records and built off of that garbage data to begin with. It wasn't until that reception person at that final other ER didn't read your records ahead of time, looked at you and was like, we're going to call the code gray right now. Yeah. And and in the ER, they deal with a lot of people, but I'm just like, isn't it worth it though? Isn't that the whole point? Like, and I still just go back to, if you were willing to inject me with nerve blockers, you weren't like, hey, maybe we should just check up, like lift the, or you just like scrap the car. Like, what are we doing? Why did you do that? And it's just mind boggling to me. And the worst part was I asked because I just was like, I don't want that doctor to do that to somebody else. Like every other doctor, them what I said. And they were like, I mean, my OB was like, I'm a dumb OB. And that was the first thing they taught in medical school. Like, you say those things, we scan you. And he is like, I age you are. Like, I would have scanned you and I just don't understand it. And so that's when I started getting the whole like, holy crap, why didn't they? But they told me, they're like, you're basically, I'm not brain damaged enough to not have a case. So I was like, that's terrible. Like, so if I was worse off than have a case, like, so I learned to let that go and just try and share with more. I love that me and Maddie have doctors and other occupational therapists and people who listen in, because I think they need to hear, you know, like, yeah, I walked into the first ER, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's the other thing, too, about as we have more of these conversations with the doctors and with the therapists and the folks who are listening in, for the most part, they only talk to survivors in the emergency situation, or when they're in that core part of treatment, when before we're in a position to be able to look back on the experience and say, what went right, what went wrong. The last time they see us, they don't generally see people in the real world who are at the point in their recovery where they can articulate some of this. So it's great that they can come back to folks who maybe experienced this a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road and are now saying, yeah, here's what we've learned and here's what we wish was different.
Yes. I'm hoping there's more of that to happen.
Yeah. How long were you then an inpatient?
I was honestly shocked. I went from the intensive ICU or whatever. I don't know. There's like a super one. I was in that one day. And then I was in the ICU for a week. And then I was only in a normal room for 1 day. And then I was released. So I wasn't even in the hospital for 2 weeks.
Wow.
I was like, my mom was scared. She's like, she was like, are you sure she's okay to leave like that with her eyes still like that? And they were like, yeah, she's fine. Like, and I mean, like, I was nervous. Like, I'm like, I just had brain surgery and you guys were like kicking me out. Like, are you sure you're supposed to do that? And they were like, yeah, you don't need to be here. I'm like, okay. I mean, I was on bed rest for a month after that, but they just, I don't know, with MRSA and everything, they just wanted me out of the hospital.
Sure.
I think also because I physically was passing so many things. Like, I remember when they came to do different scans, like, I mean, the nurses were calling me the young one. They're like, how's the young one doing? Like, I could hear, and like when a different nurse would work with me, like when I had to go to the bathroom, one of them was like, oh my God, you're moving too fast. Like, slow down. And I'm like, what do you mean? And I'm like, oh, you're like everybody else. And I just kept hearing how different I was. Like, I was sound sensitive. So I had earplugs in and headphones on, and I would smush the pillow around my head, and it still felt like people were screaming. That's why I was happy to get out of the hospital, because all those beeping noises, sharing a room with someone, all of those things were so triggering. So when they told me I could leave, I was nervous about it, but I was like, all right, if they say I'm good to go, like, let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing anybody gets any sleep in the hospital.
Yeah.
So you didn't actually then have any inpatient rehab? And
they came and like I just did stuff because my balance was really off and like I could walk, but it was like I remember because I'm like, I'm good. Like, I'm going to pass all your things that she was asking me to. And I was doing good. And then it was like interesting the things I couldn't do. Like, she was like, okay, I want you to walk like heel to toe, and like I could not do that. I kept like tipping over, and like I couldn't walk backwards, but I could walk. So they were, you know, you're passing so many things, and like
so it's basically like you could walk around reasonably safely, but there's no way you could pass a field sobriety test.
Yeah, I was like, I'm a drunk pirate. I mean, my eye, I was all wobbly. Like, so because I asked being in special education, I noticed my speech was off. Like I did have aphasia in the beginning. I don't have it as bad now. When they would do the months, I kept missing months. So I was like, something is not right up there. And I was like, you sure I don't need to see a speech therapist? And they're like, no, I just saw a physical therapist just for my eye and my balance. And one thing I wish, if you are new in your recovery, I wish I would have, again, advocated harder for myself. Because I heard, no, you don't need that. And I was like, okay. And I kept getting from doctors like, you're good enough. You're so good. And I get that because yes, I didn't have to relearn how to smile, how to walk, how to do all these like things that everyone else has to battle. But it was like, I wish now I would have said, would you say that to your daughter? Like, would you tell your daughter you're good enough? You wouldn't. But just because I'm your patient and you think, well, she's walking, she can feed herself, she can smile, she can talk, she's good enough, let her go. And so that was hard because I just wonder the things that I could have worked on earlier on. But I was surprised at how fast my eye like went back to normal. It was very weird on the days. If I did too much, my eye would go back. I would say it would go back wonky. I just call it my wonky eye.
Sure.
But I remember the first time that happened is like my eyes were getting better and then I did way too much that day and all of a sudden my eye went back crossed and I'm like, oh my God, I messed it up. Like what's wrong? And I went to sleep. I woke up and it was like back to normal. And so I'm like, it's so amazing. Like the body really does tell you when you have done too much.
Right. And especially when other parts of the brain now are being pulled in to do double duty for these other tasks to make up for the dead brain cells. And when they get too tired, they just give up those secondary tasks and just go back to their regular thing. And so that stuff starts to come back. What was your favorite memory from that time in the hospital, or do you have one?
In the hospital, I would definitely say it was nice. I had a couple friends come and visit me. I know I was only supposed to have one person, so my mom appreciated it because she worked downtown. So like they would come and sit with me and then my mom would leave. I was so grateful because in that ICU, they didn't have us separated in rooms. Like they told us that that was the wing that was the last to get renovated. So we just had curtains separating us. So and there's just a curtain separating me from 8 other people with machines going beep, 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 and all of that. So like I could hear when they did the rounds asking everybody, like, do you know what your name is? Do you know where you are? All those things. And I could hear their struggle. And so I was like, I'm just so grateful, I do know my name. And so I was just like, really, really grateful for anybody who would come and spend time with me. And one funny thing, my dad he was working with this wine company and they made an ice cream that had wine in it. And my dad's like, oh, I brought you some ice cream. And I'm like, I just had brain surgery. I can't have alcohol. Like, what? What are you? And I remember he was like, well, maybe I'll give it to one of your nurses. And I was like, I don't know if they're allowed to have like alcohol ice cream in their nurse. Like, what if they get fired for that? I'm like, what are you thinking? Like, what are you thinking? So that was funny. I feel like that's where a lot of the survivor guilt and the anxiety came because of how the doctors handled it. Like he was young. And so I know, because I guess most people's eye cross out, not in. When I showed him my eye, he like freaked out and he was like, oh my God, we need to get a like optometrist specialist down here now. And then never came back. And I was like, you guys are freaking out about my eye. And the other nurse was like, oh no, it's fine. It's just, you're different. And I was like, did everybody miss bedside manner? Like, because you guys are freaking me out. And just hearing, that as the blood breaks up in your brain, that things can change. And like, I had that happen at one point. I could hear the nurses. They were across the room, but I could hear them behind my ear. I was like, oh, is that normal? And she was like, we'll just keep track of it. I'm like, oh, that's cool. So you start learning that like to keep track of things and pay attention to it, but to not freak out over ages, I guess.
Make notes about all of this stuff, but don't obsess about it.
Yeah. Like, I want you to about it, but don't worry and don't let it bug you.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. And especially with the neurologists and the doctors, a lot of them get so deep into what they're doing. They sometimes lose that how to human type of thing. I found the nurses who are always so overwhelmed, and the CNAs tended to be some of the most human people I would deal with and stuff. And then just, when I was in rehab working with the PTs and OTs, because they've got this dedicated time with you. And so you end up just chatting with them a lot more. But it's really interesting how different people end up in different spaces like that, as everybody goes ahead and finds their own niche. So, after all that, your eyes aren't crossed at the moment, and you seem to be doing mostly okay. What deficits are you living with today?
So deficits, extremely minor. It's kind of interesting. Me and Maddie are polar opposites, and that's why I feel like we do so well together, because I didn't have to battle any of the physical things, really. My eye did cross back in normal. I still say it's wonky. Like when I have a migraine, you can tell it's just more squinty. Like my family knows. They're like, I can look at your live and I can tell that you're having a migraine because your left eye is different. I'm like, still wonky. I shouldn't say luckily, but it's the anxiety and the depression. So I never had panic attacks prior to my stroke. Now I deal with them, and it's just a lot of the emotion regulation. So I just told them, I'm like, I also feel like I went from an A student to a C minus. And the reason I can say that is when I went back to work with the kids, we were doing online courses, and I was always getting A's. Like I was 99%. I knew it. I understood it. It was like, that was my thing. And all of a sudden, I was getting D's and I was having to repeat the test until I could pass it. I know it was early on. I haven't really done any mental tests to see how it is now, but I feel like I explain it. I think the best way is like the gears in a clock. I just feel like there's still like cogs missing or things. And it's just like things don't just like roll easily anymore. And so like I noticed that with my speech. I say, not that I was super articulate before, but I feel like I just sound like a drunk Valley girl all the time now. And I just have to.
Yeah. And that's the stuff that can be so frustrating, because especially when you see it more than other people see it, because they don't live inside your head. They don't know the struggle that you go through, and they don't know the fatigue that comes along with all of that. And so that's a challenge to adapt.
Absolutely. The depression, anxiety, just I immediately just said, I feel so bad for all the people. And they're like, I'm really anxious. And I was like, just get over it. And I'm like, until you have a panic attack and you are not in control of your body and you realize that like your emotions can literally just take over your body, don't talk about somebody else's anxiety.
Yeah. Exactly. One of the things I learned through this experience is that, the line between mental illness and physical illness is a heck of a lot fuzzier than most people realize.
Absolutely. I used to say, I'm like, I wish I had a scar so people would understand that there is something wrong with me. Like I am battling things. They're just all invisible. But now talking to enough people in the community, they're like, a scar doesn't mean anything. Like my family sees my scar and they still don't care. And so I've just learned to try and educate more. Cause like, I know it's a compliment when people say, oh my God, I can't believe you had a stroke, but you look normal. You look fine. Like I used to get so livid. I'm like, first of all, what is normal mean? And second of all, no, not normal. I'll never be normal. Like, so now I just take it as I'm like, there's a lot of people dealing with invisible illnesses. And so just because on the outside I'm smiling and I look okay does not mean that everything inside, I'm like, I still bled in my brain for a week. Like there was damage.
Right. And this was a major life event for you. And when people say, well, it doesn't look like anything happened, it's like they don't mean to, but they're kind of erasing that experience and invalidating that experience that you went through.
Absolutely. I don't know if you get it. I have family, friends, it was 6 years ago. Are you going to get over it already? I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Only the biggest thing that ever happened to me. And I told, it was my mom once. I go, okay, well, you had, my brother's name's Gage. I'm like, well, you had Gage like 20 something years ago. Can you just shut up about it? Nobody needs to hear about it anymore. She was like, I go, that's basically what you're telling me is like a huge medical thing that happened to me. I should just not talk about.
Exactly. I don't get that so much, but at the same time, that's probably in part because I do still walk with a cane out in public, and perhaps even more importantly, because I've built an entire content brand around it. So, so that changes that a little bit too.
I would hope. I'm like, Mom, I'm the Neuro Mermaid. Like, there's a mermaiding here, and she's just like, I am in California and not always at the beach. I actually started the Tawnie the Mermaid was actually in Ohio. I didn't have a tail. I wasn't even swimming as a mermaid.
So what is this the mermaiding thing about? I know a whole pod of mermaids from a cruise I go on each year, but a lot of people haven't even heard of this outside of Ariel.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know all the time. Like if I'm at the airport, I'm like, I'm a mermaid. They're like, what do you mean? Like. And so it definitely is something different. I started calling myself Tawnie the Mermaid for a job. I was opening up oysters and I'm like, well, mermaids love oysters. And I was also really enriched in the fact of I found the mermaid community through YouTube because of being on bed rest. And I was like, how cool. Like these people are actually like being mermaids. That's so fun. And then cut to, luckily, we moved into this place that has a pool. And so I thought, you know what? Why don't you just get one of those tails? You used to swim. Like I was in water polo. I was on swim team. I was a great swimmer. So I thought, let's do this. What I like about mermaiding, and I just want other people to try, is try a hobby that you've never done, because then you can't compare yourself to how it used to be. And it was the only for me. I went back to working at the school and I constantly compared to, this is how it used to be. I used to be able to do this. And then bartending, same thing. I used to be able to do this. Now I can't. Well, mermaiding, the first time I put the mermaid tail on, I sat on the edge of the pool and I moved just my little legs. And I was like, oh, this is fun. This is easy. And then I went under the water and immediately I realized you can't multitask very well. Like you got to practice that, because as soon as I went under the water went up my nose, in my mouth, and I luckily stood up and I was like, oh my God, I can't remember to blow air out of my nose and keep my mouth closed and move my arms. And I was freaking out about it and beating myself up. And then I looked down at a tail and I go, of course you can't swim like a mermaid. You're not a real mermaid. Like we're not crying about this. So I really stuck with the mermaiding because it was something physical and fun that I could do where I couldn't beat myself up about it because it was something brand new. I'm not supposed to be good at it. I've never done this before.
I think that is a really fascinating approach to going ahead and starting something you don't have that basis of comparison. This is all new in your post-stroke life.
Yes. And, I've found doing physical therapy in more real life situations, like I guess because they didn't offer me that much anymore. I'm like, oh, you're not very good at multitasking. You kind of throw yourself in the ocean. Like, well, just keep getting in the water and eventually you're going to learn. I had to start out with a nose plug because I was I blow air out my nose and keep my mouth closed at the same time. I couldn't. I was I just kept sucking up water in one of the holes. And I was like, we're going to figure this out. And then what I loved about it was I reached out to a mermaid and I was like, I would just really love to get my brain scan on a tail. And I'm like, because I would love to turn something that should have killed me into something beautiful. And so I had her design it. And then it just turned into this whole thing where it was like, well, I want to show the tail off. I want to go to the beach. Oh, but I have anxiety and I'm this weird mermaid that everybody is going to look at. When you put a mermaid tail on at the beach, the people around you look. And so it was a way for me to work on all of these things in a fun way and when kids would come up to me, then I would have the chance to educate them about aneurysms and like, if you ever see your mommy, like if she just goes down, you know what number you call. And it was like a nice way for me to turn something so terrible into something fun.
Right. And it sounds like that whole mermaid community then is also another really supportive one. It's, I imagine it's a very self-selecting group of people who want to put on tails and swim and live that life.
Absolutely. And it's funny you said that. Just today, I had another mermaid reach out to me, and she was like, I just love how much you advocate for mental health. Found it interesting. A lot of us mermaids, you would think, well, if you got the guts to put on a tail, like you must just be the happiest, most outgoing person. Some of us are. Some of us, it's like, you put on that whole persona. They actually call it a mersona. But a lot of us actually have depression and anxiety. And it helped me so much because on the days when I feel terrible, I can look at one of those pictures and I remind myself, I'm like, you are still that magical mermaid. Just because you can't get out of bed right now and you feel terrible, you are still that person.
Oh, that's fantastic to be able to then tie in all of those different things. So when you talk now about how this is helping with a lot of that, challenging some of that anxiety, another way that you're very vocal about working with anxiety and some of those other challenges is your advocacy for medical marijuana. So was medical marijuana or recreational marijuana a significant part of your life before the stroke?
I did partake in it before the stroke. It definitely wasn't something brand new to me, but I never imagined being public about it. I never imagined having a conversation with my mom about it. It actually was me and Maddie doing, our Survivor Sunday, and we would have guests on and I would tell them, everyone's like, how are you dealing with your anxiety? How do you deal with your pain? And I would tell them, CBD, I, drink water, I do all these things. And then after, privately, I would message them and be like, I also use, medical cannabis. I finally got to this point where I was like, I felt like a fake. I was like, I feel like I'm not showing a huge part of my recovery. And I was nervous because I'm like, once you become public about this, you can't go back to teaching. You can't go back to working with the kids. Are you really ready to let that dream go? So despite what everybody thinks, they're like, you just lost your dang mind and you're just showing everybody everything. And I'm like, no, I feel like it's so important because even my neurosurgeon said, I would much rather have you doing that than on all the other pills that are going to kill your liver. So it is not for everybody. And I am in no way a doctor, but I'm just like to open up that. It's a natural way that handles so many of my problems. I mean, I'm off anti-seizure meds. I don't take anything for my pain now. I don't take anything for my depression or my anxiety. It's like this one plant has helped so many of my symptoms and so many of my side effects that it would just be a disservice to everybody. I'm like, you can't advocate and not share that integral little tool that you use.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you then make that shift? Was it just trying to find a solution? Was it from a recommendation from a medical professional? Was it just, let's just try anything?
Yeah, I was honestly just in so much pain and I was scared. I was like, what if you smoke this and then you have another stroke? But I was literally at the point of so much pain that I would eat my pain pills. I would crush them up so that they would hit me faster because I had that much pain. And that's where I was like, I don't want to be like that anymore. And the pain pills are just throwing a Band-Aid over this gash and it's not helping. So I was like, I have to try something. And so I started first just with edibles because I was very nervous to smoke anything. I still advocate a lot of people, maybe you should never try and smoke it, but it was trial and error, just kind of like anything. I feel like and that's why I tell people, even with your pharmaceutical drugs, it's trial and error. I mean, I don't know how many times like up and down and they're like, maybe we just need to try this dosage. Maybe we need to try this brand. And so it's the same thing with cannabis, but they've come so far now that really, if you are in a state where it's legal, you can go in and those bud tenders know so much. So I do tend to stick to like indica dominant strands because they help with pain.
Well, that's one of those interesting things too. I mean, one of the things we know about traditional medication is that, regardless of what the impact may be, individual to individual, that 300 milligrams of gabapentin is going to be 300 milligrams of gabapentin, no matter where you get it or when you get it. The marijuana space, as the legal climate is just changing here in the U.S., I imagine that's starting to get standardized, but what are you seeing in terms of standardization in terms of the products you can get from a dispensary or how that lines up, or does that matter as much?
It does. And I think that's why I know some people like certain brands or certain edibles, because you can regulate that a little bit more than some of the other stuff, like the flower. And I'm hoping with it just becoming legal in more states, that's just going to become more of a standard. I do have a couple friends in the industry, and they've explained, like, once it gets to a certain level, they're like, oh my gosh, yeah. Because I know people are like, oh my gosh, you have stoners in charge of like science and math stuff. I'm like, listen, very, very productive potheads, so don't judge them. I don't know. I guess I just hope for the best.
Assuming folks want to experiment more and their doctors don't object, if somebody wants to get started in exploring this medical marijuana space as helping them with some of the different challenges they have, how should they get started?
I suggest go, because you want to make it easy and you want to, have a consistent. So I would go to whatever shop is near you. So with cannabis, it is different depending on what state you're in. And even in the same state, like California up north, they have different products available. So I would highly suggest, there's a thing called Weed Maps. It's kind of like Yelp. And you can search, and I would talk to the bud tenders there, because they can give you suggestions. Like for me with my headaches and migraines, it was really helpful to have, they had espresso beans covered in chocolate, and those seemed to really help me. And so I really like that there is anything you could imagine. There's candy with it. There's honey sticks. There's popcorn. There's whatever will make it easier for you to enjoy it and take it. They even have it in pill form. So I just suggest going to your local place, because I would hate to tell you, oh, I love this brand, and then you're like, I can't find that anywhere. And you can always reach out to me and others in the community.
Great. So I mean, I think that's one of those things I think a lot of folks haven't, really thought about that. But these are the experts. They've been doing this for a long time, and they're well invested in standard business practices of wanting their customers to come back. Yeah.
And you can always tell, like, if you ask one bud tender and they're like, I don't really know, because I did. I was like, I have these problems. And she was like, I'm new here. And I love that. It's like at Home Depot, when you find the one person who's like, I don't know it, but I'll get you the guy who does. And so, again, just advocating for yourself and asking the questions.
That's great. Kind of like you don't want to necessarily go to the plumbing expert for your electrical needs.
Yes. Absolutely. And the good thing with cannabis, I say, is you can't overdose on it. Can you get a little too high? Yes, but you can drink milk, you can do things, exercise, getting it out of your system faster. So I guess for me, it was less scary experimenting with cannabis than the fact that they were experimenting with anti-seizure meds. I was like, so pick your poison, I guess, type of attitude.
Right. And ultimately, if it works, it works. And ultimately, That's what we want. We want the results. So one of the other projects you've been involved with for quite a while now, and you mentioned doing Survivor Sundays with Maddie, and Maddie's awesome. I had the pleasure of actually meeting her for coffee when she was here in Seattle, like a year and a half ago. And so how did you and Maddie start doing your show?
It's funny. We actually were introduced. Joe introduced us. He's like.
And Joe, of course, is Joe Borges of the Neuro Nerds, and he's been on the show before as well. Joe is awesome.
Yes, Joe. I forget that not everyone. I'm like in the stroke community. I feel like it's like Bill, Joe. There's Kyle. Like you three are like the main guys. And he put me in contact with her, and we were talking on the phone. She had just said, I've never gone live before. And so I said, why don't we just go live together? I'll help you, because I was used to going live. And so it really did just start out as, and that's why we still keep it this way. We've tried to make it super structured. Like today we're going to talk about this topic. But we find it just like a weekly check-in. We share, how we're doing, things that are working, things that are not working. And we just, interact with anybody who pops on and wants to ask things. And so it's been nice to have, people who are caretakers or people who maybe don't even have a stroke, but they're like, I had no idea, like you guys felt this way. And so it just kind of evolved that way of just like a weekly check-in, and why not just do it live?
And anybody can go ahead and find those on Instagram, and we'll include some links and a little bit more information about that in the show notes as well.
We started recording the interviews in podcast form just because a lot of people still deal with visual deficits. So being able to just hear it is so helpful.
Yeah. Plus being able to time shift and listen when you want. One of the things I really like about podcasting, and a lot of people ask why I haven't moved to just doing a ton of stuff on YouTube. And I'm like, well, first of all, video takes a lot of work. You got to get your lighting right, and the edits are a lot harder to do smooth. So there's a lot more production involved. But also, there are fewer hours in the day when you can watch video. You can't watch video while you're driving, while you're doing the dishes. It's a lot harder. But with a podcast, with an audio platform, it's also that much more intimate because you're wearing earbuds. We're whispering directly into the ears of hundreds of people around the world, and nobody is hitting us. I mean,
yeah, that's true. I do like, and it is nice to have the interaction on lives, but sometimes it's like I could be saying something really meaningful, and then my little squirrel brain sees a question and boop, it's gone. So I do really enjoy podcasts a lot.
And that's the thing. Each of these platforms is different. It has a different role and a different purpose. And that brings us to our hack of the week. But first, let's talk about sponsor Modus Nova. Recovery from hemiparesis, the loss of limb use after stroke, requires repetition. Doing thousands of repetitions can help drive the neuroplastic change in the brain to make new connections to an arm or a leg, and Modus Nova may be able to help with that. The Modus Hand and Modus Foot are AI-controlled, air-powered robotic exoskeletons that you can wear while playing games on the included touchscreen display. They help you get in those thousands of repetitions as you try to score higher and higher on all of those games. They help the survivor move their limbs or challenge the survivor to work harder so that they can get a good therapeutic workout in. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. Use promo code Strokecast to save 10% off your first month. And now back to our hack, or in this case, hacks of the week.
My phone is my lifeline because everybody's like, your memory is so great now. And I'm like, no, it's not. I just use apps. I write everything down. Like when someone tells me, we're going to do this, I put it into my calendar right away. And I set reminders an hour before, 30 minutes before. I just use the calendar on my iPhone. I used to journal all the time. I will admit I've fallen off. But journaling, I feel like helped my memory. And I started practicing gratitude. And that's been really important for the depression. And it was really important in the beginning because that's what I noticed. I'm like, I'm just writing down my blood pressure, all these times I'm taking medicine, all these side effects. And like every day it's just an analog of all the crap wrong with me. And it was actually nice. One of my doctors, she's like, what if you start writing 3 things you're grateful for in there too? I've definitely just learned that I have to put the time and energy into retraining my brain. I don't wake up excited and like, yeah, like some days, maybe once a week, But most mornings I wake up and my brain's like, ugh, we're still foggy. Yuck. And I know most people can relate to that. I feel like no, unless you're a super morning person, but there's just something different. I feel like my brain, it's like, I just feel like it's an old computer. And in the morning, it just takes a lot longer to like reboot and get ready. So I would say that, and the community, reaching out online. I know I joined Facebook groups. I never posted in them, but I read. And that was what helped me, because every doctor just kept telling me how different I was. Like, you're different. I don't know. We've never had this. We don't know. We don't know. And so all of a sudden in these groups, I could see other people being like, I'm having a really hard time with my emotion regulation. Like, I'm snapping at people. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I used to say, like, I would Hulk out. Like, I went from 0 to 100. There was no in between. And it's taken a lot of meditation, a lot of breath work, a lot of things to learn that I do still struggle with it. But like, talking to other survivors who do too makes you feel like, okay, well, I'm not crazy and it's not just me. I'm not in any way saying like, it's okay, just let yourself be that way. But like, it's nice to know, okay, everybody keeps telling me to meditate. Like, I was super against it. I was like, I can't do that. And I was like, okay, well, you start easy. I still do guided meditation, but I feel like I know you can do a quick Google search. How can I, help my recovery? But hearing from real life people, it just hits different. And I feel like it makes a big difference. So I don't want to say it's all like technology based, but I have learned that instead of being angry at my deficits or being like, why can't I do that? It's like, okay, well, cool. What tool can I use? Like, my husband's like, you live by alarms, like in your phone, but like, I have an alarm to remind me to meditate in the afternoon. I have an alarm to remind me, like, are you drinking water? Because I will sometimes just get going and being like, oh my God, I'm so thirsty. Oh, because you only had coffee this morning.
So it's about using the tools that you need, whether it's going to be a brace, a cane, or a phone to keep track of all this stuff. And, journaling is really interesting to hear you say that, because as I follow you on Instagram, and you turn out a ton of content to the extent that your social media production is almost a form of journaling as well.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. In the hospital, I was immediately posting when they told me, just because you know everything now, you may not later. I took this kind of 50 dates approach of like, if I just record it, then if I forget who I am, I can go back and put the pieces together. So I just started documenting. And it is cool because I can see my progress. My one aunt said, she goes, we can tell when you have your pain meds because all of a sudden you make a post and it's like a novel and like spelling mistakes. And I just wanted to document. And I think so many people look at social media and are scared to post because you're looking at someone who's created content for years. Like, when people tell me you're just so natural on lives, I'm like, I wasn't in the beginning. I talked completely different. I was a shell of a person. In fact, today's my anniversary of going live, and I'm going to go find that video. And it's been really nice to document my life online because of the reason, yes, is it embarrassing? Have I had people, when you're healing and recovering publicly, people have opinions. People, and then the problem is some people are like, well, you did it to yourself. You put yourself out there. And I'm like, but if I was working, so I go use that logic. If I was a bartender and I'm serving someone and they start screaming at me, you're telling me that I'm not allowed to say, please don't talk to me like that. I go, you're still allowed to advocate for yourself and not have people say things to you. And so I just found that sharing it helped me not feel so alone, because if there's just one person who's like, oh my God, I needed to hear that, or that helped me. And so I just took to social media for that reason, because I'm like, listen, I got a lot to say. Everybody around me doesn't understand me. So maybe if I just keep shouting it, I'll eventually find my people. And that's exactly what you can do online is, I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but the people who like me, they like me because they know I'm going to show up.
Right.
Like I wouldn't say every single day, but I would say almost. Like, even when I had surgery on my face, I still popped on live for a little bit because everybody's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I just want to check in with you guys. I'm like, this is a living diary. Like when I'm gone, you'll still be able to go back through. And I don't know if I'll have kids, but I'm like, what if, my great grandkids maybe will be able to be like, oh my God, look at what Nona was doing. Like, so I think it's cool to use your social media in that way.
Absolutely. It's a great way to build that legacy. And like I said, to be able to see your progress, because progress becomes harder and harder to see if you don't have those records. And as it slows down, you don't see the changes until you go back and look at, physically the video or the picture of what you were doing 6 months ago. And the other thing you mentioned there about people who think that, I'm not good on live on my first one. You know what? I encountered this with podcasters too. You know what? Everybody's episode 1 sucks, but you don't get to episode 50 unless you do episode 1, 2, 3, 4, and on. You gotta suck through it before you get good.
And I just think about them because like I still get off and I'm like, oh my God, that was terrible. And I'm like, oh, well, it was practice. It was practice. It's just, it can only get better from here. It also, like you said, with the technology, you have to learn to adapt. Mm-hmm. So it was a way that it also helped me work on those things. I mean, I was working live with my mom. So there would sometimes be like little arguments and people would be like, and I'm like, ooh, that was kind of embarrassing. And I'm like, oh, well, it's real life. So
she has a mother.
Yeah. Like, what? You mean working with your mom? I go, you know how people always say don't work with your family? Yeah, there's a reason. It's kind of hard. Kind of real hard being your mom's boss.
So going through this over these last several years, looking at where you've come from, where you are now, and all that's happened, obviously this changed your path, but was your stroke ultimately a blessing or a curse?
It was a blessing, and I had someone be mad at me for that. How could you think that was the worst thing that ever happened to you? I'm like, or the best thing, because I could have died. I should have died. As soon as the doctor explained it, he goes, it's like a bomb went off in your brain. And when blood hits certain parts of your brain, you immediately die. And I'm like, and I didn't. And every single day. So like I celebrate my stroke anniversary bigger than my birthday. And I celebrated on the 5th all the way to the 12th because I'm like, every single day I was bleeding and I should have died. I should be paralyzed. I mean, I was using a neck massager. Like the doctor was like, I can't, like everything I could have done wrong, I was doing. It's a miracle. And I just feel like whatever you believe in, he didn't keep me like this for me to just be quiet and not talk about it and not share about it. And are there times that I still sometimes will get frustrated at some things? Like my one bad thing is I'm like, I just wish it was easy. Why does everything have to be so hard for me? And I'm like, stop. It's not happening to you. It's happening for you. Like it really is. And I know some of you guys right now were just like, that's it. I can't hear her anymore. But I promise you, we have a 100% success rate. If you are listening to this right now, you have gotten through the hardest part of your life and you will get through this. It may not look how you want it to look. I mean, I could look at it as I was a special education teacher. I was applying for my master's. I had my whole life planned out. I had a boyfriend and then I had my stroke and he broke up with me. I couldn't do that job anymore. I had my counselor tell me, I don't think you can apply for your master's. Like I could look at it as it robbed me of all those things or my path diverted. And I look at so many opportunities and so many things that I've done that I would have never in a million years done if it wouldn't be for the stroke. Like I wouldn't be on a podcast with you. There would be no reason for you to talk to me. And I think when you start looking at the things it can give you instead of focusing on all the bad, you can start seeing it as more of a blessing.
Well, that is a fantastic way of being able to see that. And it's always interesting how we see these experiences in our life and how that frames what we do going forward. So Tawnie, if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
I would say Instagram is probably the fastest way. I am still over on Facebook. I'm on TikTok. I have YouTube. I have Pinterest. I am all over because I like reaching people. I know that we all ingest information differently. So I love that you can do that with social media, but I would say Instagram because the links are clickable over there. And I have a link in my bio. I update. I'm working on a little podcast. And so I am doing that daily because oddly enough, as much as I talk, I really do not like hearing the sound of my own voice. So the podcast is really, it's shown me, where my deficits are and how I need to work on things. And I'm like, well, you don't like how you speak. So how can you get better at speaking? Practicing it, recording it, and re-listening to it. So that's what I've been doing. So Instagram, Tawnie the Neuro Mermaid. Honestly, if you type in Neuro Mermaid, you should find me anywhere. I even have that little GIF sticker is actually me with my stroke tattoo, with my crown and my tail and everything. So Neuro Mermaid everywhere.
Awesome. We'll have those links in the show notes as well. So, Tawnie, this has been taken way too long to happen, and I am so glad it finally did. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on more than you know. I have looked up to you, so that's why I was like, oh my gosh, what an honor to be asked.
And speaking of mermaids, which is a sentence I don't say very often, I just got back from the Joco cruise, and there was an entire pod of mermaids on board, celebrating at the pool of the ship as the Fancy Pants Parade competitors paraded around the deck. I know, that is a lot of words that don't really make sense strung together in that particular order, but in context, it makes perfect sense. Longtime listeners may recall me talking about this in previous years. The Joco Cruise is an annual geek or nerd cruise that I've been attending for a very long time now. Musicians Jonathan Colton, Paul and Storm, and Drew Westfall charter a 2,000-passenger cruise ship from Holland, America for a week to celebrate nerdy fun, board games, video games, RPGs, music, writing, comedy, and more in a highly inclusive environment. This year, it seemed like there were even more folks on board with visible disabilities, and several of them were stroke survivors, which is awesome. I love seeing our people attending these events. Of course, the way that I attend, well, I wouldn't really call it relaxing, but it is invigorating for me. It recharges me and really fuels up my drive to go and make things and to produce more content and be more creative for the next year. So I end up attending a whole bunch of different sessions, learning things, meeting folks, and I also spend a bunch of time running sessions. So this year I even taught a class on how to use Excel to make pivot tables. I ran a group about networking for work. I organized a photo shoot for all of the stuffed animal companions that people bring on board. And of course, I ran a meetup for the other podcasters that were on board. Of course, not everybody approaches it that way. Plenty of people will spend their time in the hot tubs and relaxing at the pools or relaxing on the beach or relaxing in different other excursions and activities, exploring the spas and the fancy restaurants. And really, most people are going to be somewhere in between. So really, there is something for pretty much everybody there. I did also find that the ship itself, the New Amsterdam, is reasonably easy to navigate with my cane and my AFO. In some previous years, I actually had an accessible cabin that had a roll-in shower and a fold-down shower bench. But at this point in my recovery, I don't really need that. So I'll leave the accessible cabins for folks who will get more use out of them. The cabin I was in was great, and I was able to do everything I needed to do in there. And the staff on the ship was also always willing to help. I mean, even simple things like there was one night where steak was an option in the main dining room. But of course, I can't really cut that. So I just asked them to have that cut up in advance for me. And they did. And it was fantastic. So I really appreciate that support. And of course, it helps that I had a great travel buddy in my friend Lisa who joined me as well. Oh, and about the mermaids. Tawnie talked about her passion for mermaiding, and there were probably another 10 to 20 mermaids on the cruise too, lounging at the pool in their tails and flipping their flippers up in the air. Male, female, trans, non-binary folks all just celebrating their different passions and celebrating their mermaid lifestyle. And later that night, following that parade and the mermaids in the pool, Lisa and I went ahead and attended one of the concerts out there as well from inside the swimming pool as non-mermaids. And if you haven't attended a concert while just lounging inside the swimming pool, I highly recommend it. Overall, just a great welcoming environment that allows folks to be themselves and celebrate really whatever it is they happen to be passionate about. You can learn a lot more about Joco Cruise or book for 2024 at jococruise.com. And of course, links in the show notes. Something else that Tawnie said was also really familiar. She talked about how once you go public as an advocate for medical marijuana or cannabis use, you can't go back into teaching. Sharing her experience with cannabis and helping the community that way means that her path as a special education teacher has to end. We reach these inflection points in our lives where publicly talking about our lives closes down a lot of other options in a way that the stroke itself might not. You may recall that when I talked with stroke survivor and adult film star Misha Montana, that she said that opening the door to a career in porn closes most other doors in your life. You can't go back to a traditional life. We all have choices to make when it comes to pursuing our passions. Stroke and disability may impact our options, but prevailing societal mores may impact them even more. Ultimately, we need to decide what kind of life we want to live. The quote-unquote proper one that the general public thinks we should, or the extraordinary one that we feel called to. As I talk with survivors from around the world, the stroke, for many of us, was ultimately the deciding factor in the path that we chose, but not strictly because of the disabilities it might impose. It's a clarifying event that forces us to confront our mortality and take stock of our remaining abilities so that we can direct them to the life that we want and not the life that others think we should have. And when we look to the future, stroke is a powerful reminder of the question, if not now, when? If you'd like to follow more of Tawnie's adventures, you can find her on Instagram. A link to her profile at strokecast.com/Tawnie the Neuro Mermaid. Share this conversation with someone you know by giving them the link strokecast.com/Tawnie the Neuro Mermaid. Sign up for the Strokecast email newsletter at strokecast.com/news. And, of course, as always, don't get best. Get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.